The wind in Wyoming in 1887 did not ask permission. It simply took what it wanted. It stole the moisture from the land, the warmth from a man's skin, and the hope from weak hearts. It was a land of harsh truths and high, empty skies, a place where survival was a daily negotiation with an unforgiving God. Class lines were drawn as clearly as cattle brands, separating the men who owned the land from the men who merely worked it. Bo Callahan owned the land. He rode his stallion, a dark beast named Judge, with an easy authority that came from knowing his place in the world. At 34 years old, Bo was a man made of the same unyielding material as the rocky landscape. He had carved an empire out of this wilderness, starting with nothing but calluses and a cold fire in his belly. Now, he counted his cattle in the tens of thousands and his acres in numbers too large for most men to imagine. His wealth was a fortress he had built brick by brick, contract by contract. He was a man who believed in ledgers, in deals signed in ink, and in the relentless logic of economics. He did not believe in people. People were variables, prone to weakness and sentiment. Contracts were certain. Beside him, on a sturdy buckskin, rode Jack Darrow. Jack was older, his face a map of sun-scorched wrinkles and old sorrows. He had been with Bo for 15 years, since the days when Bo had owned more debt than dirt. Jack was a man of few words, hardened by the same life that had made Bo rich. He understood his employer's mind, respected his drive, but privately, he held on to a sliver of hope that the man inside the fortress might one day find a window. "It's a hard ride for a simple collection," Jack said, his voice raspy from the dust. He squinted toward the horizon, where a small, bleak homestead shimmered in the heat. Bo did not turn his head. His gaze was fixed on that same destination. "A debt is a debt. Jack, $800 is $800. The paper is clear." "Paper doesn't tell the whole story," Jack ventured. "A rare moment of dissent. Samuel Bishop is dead." "His death does not nullify his signature," Bo replied. His voice was flat, devoid of malice but equally empty of compassion. It was the voice he used for business, and to Bo Callahan, everything was business. They were in the arid, unforgiving stretch of country near Dry Creek. The Bishop place, as it was known, was a homestead of just over 160 acres. To most, it was a patch of sun-baked misery, hardly worth the sweat to fence it. But Bo knew its secret. The land held the primary rights to the meager water flow of Dry Creek, a trickle that became a lifeline in the brutal summer months. Owning that water meant controlling thousands of acres around it. Samuel Bishop, a man known more for his thirst for whiskey than his skill as a rancher, had been foolish enough to borrow against it. Bo Callahan had been smart enough to lend. Now, he was here to collect. As they drew closer, the poverty of the place became stark. The cabin was little more than a shack, its timbers warped and gray. The barn sagged, looking as if a strong gust might return it to the earth. Yet, beside the cabin, someone had fought the dry soil into submission. A small, defiant garden grew in neat rows, a patch of determined green in a world of brown. A few chickens scratched in the dust. A woman emerged from the cabin, wiping her hands on an apron that was worn thin but clean. She was young, too young for the weight that had clearly settled on her. Bo guessed she was perhaps 26. Her hair was the color of wheat, pulled back tightly, but strands had escaped to frame a face that was sharp with exhaustion and something else. Strength. 5 children, small and stair-stepped, spilled out behind her, clinging to her skirt or peering from the shadows of the doorway like nervous quail. The smallest was an infant bundled in her arms. This was Kelly Mae Bishop, the widow. Bo swung down from Judge, his movements economical and precise. He took off his hat, a gesture of politeness that cost him nothing. Jack remained mounted, a silent sentinel. "Mrs. Bishop," Bo stated. It was not a question. Kelly Mae Bishop did not flinch, her eyes a startling blue in her dust-streaked face. met his. She held the baby closer and pushed a slightly older boy behind her with one protective hand. "Mr. Callahan, I figured you would be coming." Her voice was steady, with a low, rough edge from the alkali dust. Bo was accustomed to different welcomes. When he came to collect, he was met with pleas, with tears, with angry, broken men, or with the obsequious shuffling of those desperate for his favor. He had expected a weeping widow, a woman undone by grief and poverty, ready to beg him for mercy. This woman was not begging. She stood on her own porch as if it were a castle wall, and she was its sole defender. "I am here regarding the note signed by your late husband, Samuel," Bo said, keeping his tone level, purely transactional. "A sum of $800, secured by this property. The note is past due." Kelly's chin lifted. "I am aware of my husband's debts. Mr. Callahan, I am also aware that he is dead. He died trying to save one of your own stray steers from that very creek, a steer that was not worth the life of a man, even a man like him." Bo's eyebrows drew together. This was an irrelevance. "The circumstances of his death are unfortunate, but they do not alter the terms of the agreement. The payment is due, or the land is forfeit." He saw a flicker in her eyes, not of fear, but of fire. She took a step forward, the wooden porch groaning beneath her worn boots. The children behind her were silent, watching him with wide, solemn eyes. "Forfeit," she repeated, the word tasting like ash in her mouth. "You ride onto my land, a man who owns half of Wyoming, a man who has 10,000 head of cattle, and you speak to me of forfeit. You come to take the last thing I have, the only roof over these children's heads, for a debt my drunken husband signed away." She shifted the baby on her hip, her gaze sweeping over him, from his expensive boots to his clean-shaven, handsome face. It was a face that had never known true hunger. She thought. "You talk of contracts," she continued, her voice rising just enough to cut through the wind. "Where is the contract that says a rich man can strip a widow bare before her husband is even cold in the ground? Where is the fairness in that, Mr. Callahan? Or is fairness just another word you have not found a use for in your ledger books?" Bo Callahan was not a man who was easily surprised. He had faced down armed rustlers, bankers in three-piece suits, and the fury of blizzards. Yet, he found himself momentarily speechless. He had come here for a simple foreclosure, a cold piece of business to secure a valuable asset. He had not expected to be confronted by a woman who wielded her pride like a weapon. He had not expected to be questioned, to be judged. He felt a strange, uncomfortable sensation creeping up his neck. It was the feeling of being seen, not as the powerful Bo Callahan, owner of the Rocking Sea Ranch, but as something smaller, something lacking. "Madam," he said, his voice tightening, "your personal situation is not my concern. The law is the law. The contract is clear. I am here to enforce it." "Then you are a poorer man than I am," Kelly May Bishop said quietly. She turned, her back straight and rigid, and looked at the 5 small faces depending on her. She looked at the patch of struggling garden, at the sagging roof she had patched herself just last week. Then she turned back to him, her eyes holding his with an intensity that unsettled him to his core. "I will not be moved. Mr. Callahan, you may have your paper, but I have these children, and I will protect this family. You will have to do what you must, and so will I." She did not cry. She did not plead. She simply stated her truth as if it were as solid as the mountains on the horizon. Bo stood there in the dusty yard, the $800 contract feeling suddenly small in his pocket. He had come to collect a debt. He had found something else entirely. He had found a woman made of prairie steel, and for the first time in a very long time, Bo Callahan did not know what to do next. Bo Callahan swung down from Judge, his boots landing in the alkali dust with a soft, final thud. The motion was fluid, economical, the movement of a man who lived in the saddle and was master of all he surveyed. He did not bother to tie his horse. Judge would not move. He ran a hand over the brim of his hat, less a gesture of politeness and more one of habit. settling himself for the business at hand. Behind him, Jack Darrow remained mounted, his expression hidden beneath the shadow of his own hat. Jack was a witness, nothing more. This was Beau's affair. Beau's gaze swept the homestead, and he felt a familiar, cold satisfaction. It was exactly as he expected. The cabin was a miserable assembly of warped gray timbers, barely clinging to the idea of a shelter. The barn sagged, its spine broken. The fences were little more than suggestions, strands of rusty wire clinging to crooked posts. It was a place of failure. It confirmed his judgment. Samuel Bishop had been a bad risk, and now that risk would be erased from his ledger. A woman emerged from the cabin, and Beau's assessment continued. She moved as if she were wading through water, her shoulders slumped with a weariness that went bone deep. She wiped her hands on an apron that was a patchwork of repairs, thin and faded. She was young, he noted, 26, according to the file. Too young to look this old. Her wheat-colored hair was pulled back in a severe bun, but the wind had plucked at it, loosening strands that whipped across a face sharp with hunger and exhaustion. Then she looked up, and her eyes met his. Beau stopped, his boot halfway to the rickety porch step. He had expected to see fear. He had expected the red-rimmed, pleading eyes of a woman already defeated, a woman who would weep and beg. Kelly May Bishop's eyes were not pleading. They were a startling, clear blue, and they were as hard and dry as the prairie itself. There was no fear in them. There was only a vast, cold, bottomless anger. She shifted the bundle in her arms, and Beau saw it was an infant, wrapped in a threadbare blanket. 4 other children materialized from the shadows of the doorway, peering out with silent, unnervingly adult eyes. They did not run or cry. They simply watched, a small, pale audience to the unfolding drama. Mr. Callahan, Kelly May Bishop said. Her voice was not a question. It was a statement of fact, as flat and final as a gunshot. I figured you would be coming. Beau was momentarily thrown. The script in his head, the one where he delivered his terms to a sobbing widow, dissolved. He recovered quickly, falling back on the unassailable logic of his position. He stepped up onto the porch, the old wood groaning under his weight. He was a large man, and he used his size, his sheer physical presence, to intimidate. It always worked. He took off his hat, the gesture automatic. Mrs. Bishop, I am here regarding the note signed by your late husband, Samuel. He kept his voice level, devoid of emotion. It was the voice he used for bankers and rustlers alike. A sum of $800. It is past due, secured by this property. Kelly looked at him. She did not look at the paper he half reached for in his coat pocket. She looked directly into his face, as if she were trying to find a man inside the expensive clothes. My husband is dead, she said, her voice just as cold as his. I am aware. Beau replied. His death is an unfortunate circumstance. It does not, however, alter the terms of the agreement he signed. The debt is outstanding. The collateral is forfeit. He saw a muscle jump in her jaw. The baby in her arms stirred, and she rocked it with a practiced, absent motion. Forfeit, she repeated. The word came out like a shard of glass. You ride onto my land, a man who owns half of Wyoming, a man who has 10,000 head of cattle, and you speak to me of forfeit. She took a step toward him. Beau was not a man who ever stepped back, but he felt an involuntary urge to do so. She was radiating a heat that was almost visible. You speak of his signature, she continued, her voice rising, acquiring a dangerous tremor. Let me tell you about his death, Mr. Callahan. Or does that not factor into your cold arithmetic? Beau felt a flicker of annoyance. This was what he hated. The mess, the emotional pleading. Madam, I am not here to discuss your personal tragedies. I am here for a payment, or I am here for the deed. It is that simple. Simple, she laughed, a short, bitter, terrible sound that startled the chickens in the yard. You think this is simple. You will hear this story, Mr. Callahan. You will stand on my porch and you will listen to the truth before you throw my children into the dirt." He had never been spoken to this way, not by a man, and certainly not by a destitute widow. His anger began to rise. A cold, familiar fire. "You are in no position to make demands, but speak your piece. It will not change the outcome." "Oh, I know it will not change you," she said, her blue eyes blazing. "But you will know what you are doing. My husband, Samuel, he was a weak man. I know that better than any soul on this earth. He drank. He failed us. He signed your devil's bargain. But his last act," her voice cracked, "just once," and a flash of shame and rage crossed her face. "His last act was for you." Beau's eyebrows drew together. "What nonsense is this?" "He was terrified of this day," she said, her words tumbling out, sharp as stones. "He was terrified of you. 2 weeks ago, during the spring flood, he saw one of your steers, one with your precious rocking sea brand, trapped in the Dry Creek wash. He thought—" She shook her head, the memory clearly painful. "He thought if he saved it, you would be lenient. He thought he could trade that $30 steer for his $800 debt." She paused, taking a shuddering breath. "He was a fool, and he was drunk. He went into that water after it, and the current took them both, your steer and my husband, and your foreman. He did not even send a man to help me find the body. My neighbors did. We buried what was left of him up on that hill." She pointed to a small, bare rise behind the cabin, marked by a simple wooden cross. Beau stared at her, his mind processing this new information. He had heard Bishop had drowned. He had not heard the details. It was, as he suspected, the act of a fool. It was weak. It was pathetic. This was the kind of messy, sentimental thinking that led to ruin. He felt a wave of disgust. "And what does this story change?" Beau asked, his voice flat and brutal. "It counts for nothing. It proves nothing, except that he was as foolish in his death as he was in his life. If he had spent half that energy working his land instead of chasing steers in a flood, you would not be in this position." He expected this to break her. He had seen strong men crumble under far less. He had seen the fight go out of them, leaving only the hollow shell of defeat. Kelly May Bishop did not break. She stared at him for a long, silent moment. The wind whipped a strand of her hair across her face, and she did not bother to brush it away. When she spoke again, her voice was quiet, almost conversational, and it was the most terrifying sound Beau had ever heard. "My God," she whispered, "you truly are what they say you are. You are an empty place. Mr. Callahan, there is nothing inside you." "I am a businessman," he corrected her, the words stiff. "You are a vulture," she countered, her voice no longer whispering. It was trembling with a rage that was almost holy. "You who own everything, you who lose more cattle to a blizzard than I have ever seen in my life. You come here, to this patch of dust, to take the only thing left from 5 children whose father died in your service, however foolishly." She stepped so close he could smell the lye soap on her skin and the dust in her hair. "You stand there in your expensive suit." "This suit cost $40, Beau interrupted, irritated by the inaccuracy. "And you dare to speak to me of business?" she spat. "This is not business. This is theft. This is cruelty. This is sin." There it was, that feeling, the profound discomfort. It was a ringing in his ears, a pressure in his chest. He was used to power. He was used to control. This woman was neither powerful nor in control of anything. Yet she was looking at him not with fear, but with pity, contempt, as if he was the one who was poor, as if he was the one lacking. He looked past her, through the open cabin door. He saw the dark, bare interior, a rough table, a cold stove, a single straw mattress on the floor where the children must sleep. He looked at the children themselves, their faces pale, their eyes enormous, drinking in the sight of the rich man who had come to end their world. He felt strange, A profound, unsettling wrongness. The world, which had always been a place of hard lines and clear rules, suddenly felt tilted. The clean, unassailable logic of his contract, his right, his law. It was all being blurred by this woman's fury and her undeniable grief. He was Beau Callahan. He did not feel strange. He acted. "I have heard enough," he said. His voice clipped. He put his hat back on, settling it firmly, a crown of his authority. "You have no money. The land is forfeit. I am filing the papers in Cheyenne tomorrow. My men will be here by the end of the week to take possession." He was turning away. The business concluded. "I advise you to be gone." He had one boot off the porch when her voice, clear and cold as ice, stopped him. "Where?" He stopped. He did not turn around. "Where what?" "Where shall we be gone?" she asked. It was not a plea. It was not a question. It was a demand for an answer. "Shall I take my 5 children, including my infant, and walk into the prairie? Will you give us a wagon? Will you give us food? Or do you just expect the wind to take us, just as it takes the tumbleweeds?" He felt, rather than saw, Jack Darrow shift in his saddle. He could feel Jack's disapproval, Jack's shame. It was a silent judgment, and it angered Beau more than the woman's words. He turned back to her, his face a mask of cold fury. He was Beau Callahan. He would not be made to feel. "Your predicament is not my creation, Mrs. Bishop," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Samuel Bishop created it. His whiskey created it. Your choices in marrying such a man created it. I am simply the collector, the consequence. That is all." He turned and walked away, not waiting for a reply. He swung himself up onto Judge, his movements sharp, angry. He did not look at her again. He did not need to. He had won. The contract would be enforced. The business was done. But as he and Jack rode away, the dust rising behind them, he could not shake the feeling of her blue eyes on his back. He could not shake the sound of her voice. And he could not shake the terrible, unfamiliar, and deeply unwelcome feeling that had lodged itself in his gut. He had come to secure an asset. He had come to enforce a rule. Instead, he felt like he had just been in a fight, and he was not entirely certain who had won. The ride away from the Bishop homestead was silent, but the silence was loud. It was filled with the things that had not been said, with the anger that still hung in the air like dust, and with the ringing, absolute finality of the woman's last words. The prairie wind had picked up, howling a low, mournful tune through the sagebrush, a fitting accompaniment to the disquiet that had settled in Beau Callahan's gut. Beside him, Jack Darrow kept his eyes fixed between his horse's ears. Jack had a way of being silent that was more expressive than most men's speeches. It was a solid, unyielding silence, and Beau could feel the weight of it, thick with disapproval. He had seen Jack look this way before, usually when one of the hands was being cruel to a horse. They rode for nearly a mile before Jack finally spoke, his voice dry and raspy. "That was a hard thing. Beau." Beau's hands tightened on the reins. Judge felt the tension and sidestepped nervously. It was business. "Jack, nothing more." The paper was signed. "Aye," Jack said, and that one word was heavy with meaning. The paper was signed. He spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dust. "Her husband was a damn fool. But I am not sure the children are." "The children are her concern," Beau snapped, his voice sharper than he intended. "Just as my business is my concern. We do not make the rules. We just play by them." "Some men do make the rules," Jack said, so quietly Beau almost did not hear him over the wind. Beau said nothing to that. He spurred Judge into a faster trot, wanting to outrun the conversation, to outrun the prickling irritation that was crawling up his skin. But he could not outrun his own mind. The image of Kelly May Bishop would not leave him. It was burned onto the back of his eyelids. He kept seeing her standing on that rickety porch, a wisp of a thing. Really, with a face that was all sharp angles and desperate pride. He had come expecting to find a puddle of grief. He had found a pillar of granite. He had foreclosed on men twice her size, men with rifles in their hands and murder in their eyes. He had faced them down without a flicker of doubt. He had taken their land, their cattle, their livelihoods, and he had slept soundly that night, his ledger balanced, his world in order. So why did this one feel different? He tried to dismiss her. A hysterical woman, undone by grief, lashing out with senseless female words, calling him an empty place, a vulture. The words were absurd. He was not empty. He was full. He was full of success, full of power, full of the tangible, heavy reality of his 10,000 cattle and his sprawling ranch. He was the furthest thing from empty. And yet, the wind felt colder now. It cut through his expensive wool coat, and he found himself thinking of a time when he had owned nothing but a threadbare blanket. He had not allowed himself to remember those days in years. He had built his entire life on a foundation of forgetting. But the woman's words, her blue-eyed fury, had acted like a pickaxe, chipping away at the stones he had so carefully laid. He was 17 years old again, adrift in a Wyoming winter that was far crueler than this one. His father was dead, his mother gone. He had a horse so thin its ribs looked like a washboard, and a debt of $5 at the mercantile in Laramie. $5. He remembered the shame of it, a physical ache in his belly that was worse than the hunger. He remembered the storekeeper, a man named Hatcher, looking at him with a cold, measuring gaze, a gaze that saw not a desperate boy, but a bad risk, a failed account. "No more credit, boy," Hatcher had said, his voice as flat and final as Bo's had been just an hour ago. "The paper is the paper." Bo had stood there, his hands raw and bleeding from chopping wood he could not sell, and he had felt a rage so pure and cold it had almost burned him alive. It was the rage of the powerless, the humiliation of being seen as nothing. In that moment, he had sworn an oath to himself. He would never be that boy again. He would never be powerless. He would be the man who held the paper. He would be the one who owned the ledger. He would build a fortress of wealth so high and so thick that no one, ever, could look at him with that cold dismissal again. And he had done it. He had clawed his way up, using Hatcher's own cold logic as his only tool. He had saved. He had starved. He had worked until his hands were permanent claws. He had bought his first small herd. He had defended it with a shotgun and a terrifying resolve. He had made his first loan. He had foreclosed on his first piece of land. It had belonged to a man very like Samuel Bishop, a drinker who had let his fences fall down. Bo had felt nothing but grim satisfaction. It was the law of the prairie. The strong survived. The weak, like that man, like Hatcher, like his own father, they were erased. He had become the man he needed to be, hard, unyielding, a man who believed only in the contract. Until today, Kelly Mae Bishop had not wept. She had not begged. She had not crumpled. She had stood on her patch of dust, surrounded by her hungry children. And she had looked at him with that same cold rage he remembered feeling in Hatcher's store. But she had done something more. She had not just been angry at her powerlessness. She had been angry at his power. She had looked at his fortress, his wealth, his rules, and she had called them empty. He kept hearing her voice. "Where shall we be gone?" He had no answer. He had never needed an answer. It was not his problem. His problem was the $800 and the water rights. But his mind, traitorously, kept supplying the images. He saw her trying to patch that leaking roof in a rainstorm, the baby wailing. He saw her hoeing that miserable garden, her knuckles raw, fighting the baked earth for a handful of withered carrots. He saw her staring at an empty flour sack, the 5 small faces watching her, their bellies aching. This was sentiment. This was weakness. He tried to shake it off, to focus on the numbers. The Dry Creek water rights would open up the entire North Pasture. It would allow him to graze another 1,000 head. It was a smart, clean, logical business move. He pictured the map of his land, the new section colored in, his empire expanding. And he felt nothing. The cold satisfaction he had anticipated was absent. In its place was the hollow echo of the woman's voice, an empty place. He realized, with a jolt, that he was not just thinking about her. He was thinking about her resilience. He had come to collect from a failed enterprise. But the enterprise was not failed. The husband was. The woman. She was still fighting. She was still standing. She was hoeing that garden. She was patching that roof. She was facing down Bo Callahan, a man who could crush her with a word. And she was not blinking. She was not a bad risk. She was strong. She was a fighter. She was like... He cut the thought off, but it was too late. She was like him. The realization hit him like a physical blow. She was that same 17-year-old boy in Hatcher's store, filled with rage and a desperate, unyielding will to survive. He had just walked onto her porch, the fortress of his success wrapped around him, and he had become Hatcher. He had become the very thing he despised, the cold, measuring eye that saw only the debt, not the human being. Bojack's voice cut through his thoughts. Bo startled, realizing he had pulled Judge to a complete stop. The sun was bleeding toward the horizon, painting the sky in brutal shades of orange and purple. "What is it?" Bo said, his voice rough. Jack watched him, his old eyes knowing. "You are a long way off." Bo grunted, nudging Judge forward again. But the pace was slow. His mind was still back at the cabin. He was not just a businessman collecting a debt. He was a man being weighed on a scale he had not known existed. He had always measured his life in dollars and acres. Kelly Mae Bishop had just measured him in humanity, and found him lacking. He had all the power. He had the contract. He had the law on his side. He could ride to Cheyenne tomorrow and file the papers, and by the end of the week, the Bishop family would be a puff of dust on the prairie. It was his right. So why did it feel so profoundly wrong? Why did he keep seeing her face? Not as a debtor, but as a person. A woman of incredible, terrifying strength, trapped in an impossible situation. A woman who was doing what he had done, fighting to survive, only she was doing it with 5 children tethered to her. He tried to justify it. The land, the water, the business. He began to ask himself a question he had never asked before. Why? Why did he need more? He had 10,000 cattle. He had thousands of acres. He had more money than he could spend in 10 lifetimes. What was the point of crushing this one? Small, defiant woman. For the rules, for the contract. He had spent his life believing those rules were iron. Now, they felt brittle. He had spent his life thinking that feelings were a weakness. Now, the absence of them felt like a sickness. He rode on, the sun dipping below the mountains, plunging the world into a cold, purple twilight. He had come to Dry Creek to close a deal, to finalize a simple, profitable transaction. He had expected to ride home feeling richer. Instead, he felt a strange and terrible poverty. He was a man who had everything, and he was staring into a hollow, empty place inside himself, a place that a poor widow with nothing had somehow managed to find and name. The questions she had raised had no easy answers, and Bo Callahan, for the first of his adult life, was utterly and completely lost. Bo Callahan did not sleep that night. He sat in his leather chair, in his house that was bigger than a church, and stared into a cold fireplace. The conversation with Jack Darrow had been brief and one-sided. Jack had looked at him, his face carved with disappointment, and said, "You did what the paper told you to do, Bo. I suppose you will sleep well." But he had not. He had seen her face. He had heard her voice. He had felt the truth of her accusation, that he was an empty place, the 17-year-old boy inside him, the one who had sworn to become powerful, was now staring at the man he had become, the man who was Hatcher, the man who saw only the debt. At dawn, he rose. He did not wake his foreman. He did not wake Jack. He saddled Judge himself, his movement stiff and automatic. He rode out alone, back toward Dry Creek. He did not know what he was going to say. He only knew that the action he had taken, the eviction, was a knot in his gut that he could not abide. It was inefficient. It was messy. It was wrong. When he crested the ridge and saw the homestead, she was already outside. She was trying to split wood, wielding an axe that was clearly too heavy for her. She swung it with a desperate, clumsy force, the blade glancing off the side of a stubborn log. She did not see him approach. He stopped his horse 10 yards away. The thud of the axe was the only sound, punctuated by her sharp, frustrated breaths. Finally, the log split. She bent over, her back heaving, and gathered the pieces. When she turned, she saw him. She did not scream. She did not move. She simply dropped the wood. Her face, which had been flushed with effort, went pale as ash. She thought he had brought his men. She thought this was the end. Her hand flew to her throat. "Mr. Callahan?" she whispered. He dismounted slowly. He felt awkward, out of place. This was not a negotiation. He did not know what it was. "Mrs. Bishop," he said, his voice a low gravel. She straightened her back, and the terror in her eyes was replaced by that cold, hard fire he remembered. "Have you come to watch? Do you need to see us in the dirt with your own eyes before you are satisfied?" "I have been thinking," he said, ignoring her words. He walked closer, stopping a few feet away. "About the debt." "There is nothing to think about," she said, her voice brittle. "You said it yourself. The contract is clear. We will be gone by nightfall, though I do not know where." "That is the problem," he said, grasping at the first logical thought he could find. "It is a problem. It is not a clean transaction. Leaving a widow and 5 children on the prairie. It causes talk. It is bad for business." She stared at him, her blue eyes narrowing, trying to understand his angle. A bitter laugh escaped her. "Bad for business. Is that what we are to you, an inconvenience to your reputation?" "It is an inefficiency I do not like," he said, his voice stiff. He was a businessman. This was a business discussion. "I am prepared to amend the terms." She watched him, her body tense, her hand still near her throat. "Amend?" "I will not file the papers in Cheyenne today," he said. "I will give you more time." A flicker of something, not hope. It was too sharp for hope. Perhaps just confusion crossed her face. "More time. What good is more time? I do not have $800. I will not have it tomorrow, or the next day." "How much time would you need?" he asked, purely as a hypothetical. She shook her head, the motion sharp. "A lifetime. Mr. Callahan, this land is poor. My husband, he left me with nothing but this debt and his children." "You have the wheat," he said, gesturing with his chin toward the small, 2-acre patch near the creek. "It is ready. It could be harvested." "That," she scoffed, "that is seed, mostly. Maybe enough to feed us. It is not $800. Nothing here is—" "I am offering you 7 days," he said. The number came out of nowhere. It felt final. 1 week. You harvest what you can. You sell what you can. You raise the $800, and the note is cleared. The land is yours, free and clear. Kelly stared at him as if he had grown a second head. 7 days, she repeated. She looked at the small field. She looked at her own hands, already raw from the axe. She looked at the cabin, where the faces of her children were pressed against the dirty glass. Then she looked back at him, and her anger returned, pure and hot. "What game is this?" she demanded. "This is a mockery. This is crueler than just taking it. I am one woman. I have 5 children, one an infant. I cannot plow and harvest 2 acres in 7 days. It is impossible. You know it is impossible. You are just easing your own conscience, so you can tell your friends in town that you gave the poor widow a chance before you destroyed her." He had not expected this. He had expected gratitude, Tears, relief. He had not expected his offer to be thrown back in his face as just another form of cruelty. It angered him. "It is a fair offer," he insisted, his voice hardening. "It is more than fair. It is 7 days you did not have this morning." "It is a lie," she cried, taking a step toward him. "You sit there on your fine horse, and you offer me a mountain I cannot climb. Why? Why do this?" "Because," he said, his own anger rising, "I do not like to be told I am an empty man. Mrs. Bishop, I do not like to be told I am a vulture." The confession hung in the air between them, shocking them both. He had not meant to say it. It was a crack in the fortress, a moment of weakness. She saw it. Her eyes widened, her own anger faltering. She saw the flash of the 17-year-old boy, the raw nerve he had touched. "So this is for your pride," she whispered. "Not for us. It is so you can feel like a good man." "I am a businessman," he said, shoving the weakness back down. "And I am here to protect my investment, the land, the debt. It is $800, but it is clear you cannot work the land and protect your children at the same time." She stiffened again. "I have been doing it." "You have been failing," he said, his gaze sweeping the broken fence, the sagging barn door. "You cannot do it all. You know that, and I know it." "So what is your point, Mr. Callahan? That I should be grateful for your impossible offer?" "My point," Bo said, making the decision as the words left his mouth, "is that I am staying—" She recoiled as if he had struck her. "What? No, you will not. You will not set foot on my property." "It is my property," he corrected her, his voice cold as steel. "Or it will be in 7 days. I am here to protect the asset. I am here to ensure that you are, in fact, working to repay the debt, and to ensure that no complications arise. This is wild country, a woman alone. It is a liability to my investment." Kelly's mind reeled. He was going to stay here, the man who hated her, the man who was taking everything. He was going to watch her. You cannot," she stammered. "Where? I have no place for you." "Your barn will be sufficient," he said, swinging down from Judge. "I will take my meals there. I will not trouble you or your children. I am not here to help you. Mrs. Bishop, do not misunderstand me. I am here to make sure this transaction is seen through. You have 7 days to raise the money. I will be here to collect it, or to collect the deed. Until then, I am your creditor. Nothing more." He did not wait for her permission. He grabbed the reins of his horse and led Judge toward the sagging barn. Kelly stood frozen, the axe handle still clutched in her hand. She was trapped. He had offered her a lifeline, but it was attached to an anchor. He was giving her a chance, but he was doing it in the cruelest way possible, by forcing his presence on her, by reminding her every second of every day that he was the master, and she was the debtor. "Fine!" she yelled at his back, her voice shaking with rage and a terrifying, unwelcome flicker of relief. "Stay in the barn. Mr. Callahan, watch me. Watch me work until my hands bleed. It will make your victory that much sweeter." He stopped at the barn door but did not turn. "Then I suggest you get to work. Mrs. Bishop, the clock is ticking." The next 3 days were a silent, brutal war. Bo woke in the barn before the sun. The smell of old hay and dust was sharp in his nostrils. It brought back memories he did not want. Memories of cold nights spent huddling for warmth, his belly aching with hunger. He shoved them away and emerged into the cold blue light of dawn. She was already up. He would see her, a small, determined silhouette, moving from the cabin to the chicken coop, the milking cow lowing impatiently. He did not speak to her. He did not say good morning. He kept to his word. He was not there to help. He was there to secure his asset. He spent the first day mending the corral fence. The posts were rotten. He spent hours digging new holes. His muscles, which were used to the saddle, screaming in protest. He cut new posts from a stand of timber near the creek. He strung new wire. He told himself he was doing it so the mules and the milk cow, his collateral, would not wander off. He watched her. She hitched the mule to the plow, fighting the stubborn animal. She, a small woman, was trying to break the hard, dry earth. It was a pathetic, heroic sight. She would plow for an hour, then run back to the cabin to check on the infant, then back to the plow. He saw her oldest boy, a small, thin child of perhaps 6, hauling a bucket of water from the pump. The bucket was too heavy. He stumbled, spilling half of it. Kelly, seeing the wasted effort, put her head in her hands for just a moment, her shoulders shaking. Then she straightened, marched to the pump, and hauled the water herself. Bo felt that now familiar twist in his gut. He turned away and struck the fence post with a savage blow. On the second day, he repaired the pump. The handle was loose, the seal leaking. It took him half the morning. His hands, more accustomed to ledgers than to grease, getting skinned and dirty. He told himself he was doing it because the water was necessary for the livestock. She was in the field, cutting the wheat with a hand scythe. It was back-breaking, agonizing work. He could see her stop every few minutes, stretching her back, her face a mask of pain. They did not speak. The only sounds were the rasp of the scythe, the thud of his hammer, and the cries of the children. The children watched him. They hid when he came near, peering from behind the cabin, their eyes wide and frightened. He was the monster, the man who was going to take their home. He ignored them. On the evening of the third day, he was finishing the repair on the pump. He was exhausted. He was covered in sweat, grease, and dust. He had not worked this hard, this physically, in 15 years. He had managed work. He had not done it. His back ached. His hands were raw, and he felt strangely alive. The cabin door opened. He tensed, expecting another confrontation. Kelly stood on the porch. The children were not visible. The smell of wood smoke and something cooking drifted toward him. Mr. Callahan. He turned slowly, wiping his hands on a rag. She was holding a tin plate. It was heaped with something. "You fixed the pump," she said. Her voice was flat. "Not grateful, just stating a fact." "The livestock need water," he replied, his voice equally flat. "You have not eaten a hot meal in 3 days," she said. "I told you I would provide for myself." "And I am telling you," she said, her patience snapping, "that I cooked a pot of rabbit stew. My son, Samuel Jr., he snared the rabbit. There is enough." She stepped off the porch and thrust the plate at him. He looked at the plate. He looked at her. Taking food from her was a change. It crossed a line. It was not in the contract. She saw his hesitation, and her pride, always so close to the surface, flared. "It is not a gift, Mr. Callahan. It is a transaction. You are a man of transactions. You fixed my pump. I am paying you in stew." He looked at her face, harsh and proud in the twilight, and he took the plate. Their fingers brushed. It was like a spark of static electricity, a jolt that went straight through him. "Thank you," he said. The words felt strange in his mouth. She just nodded, a sharp, bird-like motion, and turned, disappearing back into the cabin. The door closed, leaving him alone in the yard. He sat on the edge of the porch, the tin plate warm on his knees. He looked at the stew. It was thin, mostly potatoes and wild onions, with a few meager scraps of rabbit, but it was hot. He took a bite. The warmth spread from his mouth down into his chest, into the empty place she had named. It was impossibly good. He was aware of the sounds from inside the cabin, the low murmur of Kelly's voice, a child's brief laugh, quickly shushed, the sounds of a family, a life. He ate slowly. He remembered, suddenly and with piercing clarity, a time 15 years ago. He and Jack Darrow had been caught in an early blizzard, and they had shared the last of their coffee and a single can of beans, huddled by a dying fire. They had been starving, half frozen, and they had felt happy. They had felt human. He had forgotten what that felt like. The warmth that had nothing to do with money. The connection that had nothing to do with a contract. He finished every last drop, scraping the tin plate clean. He was still Bo Callahan, the man who owned half of Wyoming. He was still her creditor. She was still his debtor. But as he sat there in the deepening twilight, listening to the small, fragile sounds of the family inside, he felt the first terrifying thaw in the frozen fortress of his heart. The tin plate was cold in Bo's hand when he finally rose from the porch. He walked back to the barn, the human sounds from the cabin fading behind him. He set the plate on a bale of hay, but he did not lie down. He stood in the dark, smelling the old hay and the grease on his hands, and he felt the silence of his own life pressing in on him. That stew, thin as it was, had been a violation of the terms. He had come as a creditor. He had eaten as a man. He woke on day 4 with a stiff back and a clear head. The brief, unwanted thaw from the night before had frozen over. He was Bo Callahan. He had a purpose. He had been momentarily distracted by sentiment. It would not happen again. He would be hard. He would be clear. He would finish this business. He grabbed the empty plate and marched to the cabin. He had intended to drop it on the porch, a silent return, but the cabin door was open. He stopped, unseen. He did not see the granite pillar from the yard. He saw a mother. Kelly was sitting on the floor, her back against the rough wall. The infant was asleep in a wooden crate nearby. She had her second youngest, a little girl of about 3, cradled in her lap. The child was coughing, a dry, racking sound. Kelly was wiping her face with a damp rag, her own face etched with a weariness so profound it made Bo's chest tighten. She was murmuring to the child, a low, soft song. He could not make out the words, only the tenderness. He saw her oldest boy, Samuel Jr., watching his mother with that same unnerving, adult gaze. This was the scene he had interrupted. This was the life he was threatening to dismantle for $800 and a water right. He must have made a sound, a boot shifting on the gravel, because her head snapped up. In an instant, the tenderness vanished. The granite pillar slammed back into place. Her eyes went cold. She gently set the child down and rose to her feet, blocking the doorway. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice a low rasp. Bo felt clumsy. He held up the plate. "I am returning this." She snatched it from his hand, her knuckles white. She did not look at him. She looked past him, at the field. "I see. Your payment is complete. 4 days left. Mr. Callahan, are you counting?" "I am," he said, his voice harder than he intended. He was annoyed at her for being so proud, annoyed at himself for, feeling. "Your girl, she is sick." "She has a cough," Kelly snapped, her back rigid. "It is none of your concern. My children are not your concern." "They are if they slow down the work," he said, falling back on the only language he had, the language of the ledger. "You are wasting daylight." Her blue eyes blazed. "I have been up for 2 hours, while you were comfortable in my barn. Do not speak to me of daylight." She turned to go inside, but his voice stopped her. "You cannot do it." She froze, her hand on the doorframe. "What did you say?" "The wheat. You cannot do it alone, not in 4 days, not with a scythe, not with sick children." He was stating a fact, an economic reality. "I will," she said, her voice trembling with a suppressed, violent rage. "I will work until my hands bleed, and I will be standing on this porch with your money in my hand. And then, Mr. Callahan, I will have the great pleasure of watching you ride away." "You are a fool," he said, his own anger rising. Why was she fighting him? Why was she so difficult? "You are blinded by pride. This is not about your pride. This is about a debt. It is a practical problem, and you are failing." "Get off my porch," she whispered. "No," he said, stepping up onto it. He was towering over her. "I am not here to help you, Mrs. Bishop. I am here to get my money. And at this rate, you will collapse from exhaustion by noon. The wheat will rot in the field, and I will be forced to take the land anyway. It is an inefficient outcome. I do not like inefficiency." "So what, you will just stand there and watch me fail?" she cried. "I am going to harvest the wheat," he said. She stared at him, her mouth falling open. "You... what?" "I am going to harvest the wheat," he repeated, as if speaking to a child. "I will not let my asset be squandered by your stubbornness. I will do the work. You will bundle. You will tend to your children. We will get this done, and then you will pay me, and I will leave." He did not wait for her answer. He pushed past her, not touching her, but his presence filled the small doorway and grabbed the scythe that was leaning against the cabin wall. He strode toward the field, the tool feeling surprisingly balanced in his hands. Kelly stood on the porch, shaking. She was vibrating with humiliation and a terrifying, confusing gratitude. He was not helping her. He was possessing her. He was taking over her land, her work, her last chance at salvation, all under the guise of collecting his debt. It was the most intimate, invasive, and arrogant thing a man had ever done to her. She watched him for a moment. He was not a man who was unfamiliar with work. He swung the scythe with a long, powerful, rhythmic grace. The wheat fell in perfect, clean lines. He was a machine, a force of nature. He would do in one day what would have taken her 3. She felt a hot, bitter tear slide down her cheek. She wiped it away angrily. He would not see her cry. He would not see her weak. "Samuel Jr.," she called, her voice sharp. "Watch the little ones. I am going to the field." She would not be ordered to tend to her children. She would work beside him. She would not be his dependent. She would be his equal, even if it killed her. For the next 2 days, they worked. It was a strange, silent, brutal partnership. They did not speak. The only sounds were the swish, swish, swish of Bo's scythe cutting through the stalks, and the rustle of Kelly, following behind him, gathering the wheat into bundles, her hands and arms already bleeding from 1,000 small cuts. He was relentless. He did not stop for water. He did not stop for the midday sun. He worked with a cold, focused fury, the same fury he applied to his ledgers, the same drive that had built his empire. He was channeling all his frustration, all his confusing, unwanted feelings, into the physical act of labor. And she matched him. He would finish a long row, and he would turn, his arms burning, his shirt soaked with sweat, and she would be right behind him. Her face was pale beneath the dust and chaff. Her lips were cracked, but her eyes were defiant. She would not stop. She would not look at him. She just worked, gathering, binding, stacking. He started to see her in a new light. He was not just seeing a debtor. He was seeing a soldier. He was seeing a strength that matched his own. He had built his world on the idea that he was stronger, smarter, and more ruthless than anyone else. And here was this small, starving woman, matching him step for step, her body fueled by nothing but raw pride and a terrifying love for her children. His annoyance began to curdle into a strange, grudging respect. It was a respect he had not felt for anyone in a very long time. It was not the respect he had for Jack, which was born of loyalty. It was the respect of one predator recognizing another. She was a survivor, just like him. On the evening of day 5, the last of the wheat was cut. It lay in bundled stacks. A small, golden fortune. They were both near collapse. Kelly was at the pump, her hands so raw she could barely work the handle. She was washing the chaff from her face and neck. Bo approached. He was aching in places he had forgotten he had. He stood a few feet away, watching her. The sun was setting, painting the sky in violent streaks of red and purple. It cast a bronze light on her, turning the dust on her skin to gold, the loose strands of her hair to fire. "It is done," he said. His voice was a hoarse croak. "The cutting is done," she corrected him. Not looking, she splashed water on her arms, wincing as it hit the open cuts. "Threshing and winnowing will take another day, and the wagon wheel is broken." Of course it was. Bo let out a short, rough sigh. "I will fix it in the morning." She finally turned to face him. Her face was a mask of exhaustion. "Why?" she asked, her voice low. "Why are you doing this? This is not in the contract." "I told you," he said, his voice stiff. "Inefficiency. I am protecting my asset. I am getting my money." "No," she said, shaking her head. "No, that is a lie. You fixed the pump. You are fixing the wagon. You harvested my field. This is not about $800. You are a liar, Mr. Callahan." "Be careful, Mrs. Bishop," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "You are," she insisted, stepping closer. She was so tired she was trembling, but she would not back down. "You are not the man you pretend to be. You are not the cold, empty man who rode in here. That man would have let me fail. That man would be in Cheyenne right now, taking my home." "That man," Bo said, his chest tight, "is right here. Do not mistake hard labor for a soft heart. I have a past, Mrs. Bishop. I have learned the hard way. That sentiment is a trap. It is a weakness. It is a tool that people use to get what they want." He was thinking of Catherine. He was thinking of the $20,000, of the gambler, of the humiliation. He saw Catherine's soft smile, her pleading eyes, and for a terrifying second, he saw them on Kelly's face. His blood ran cold. He was being played. This woman, this proud, strong, defiant woman. She was smarter than Catherine. She was not using weakness and tears. She was using strength and pride. She had seen his crack. She had seen that he despised weakness. So she was showing him strength. She had paid him with stew. She had challenged him. And he, like a fool, had fallen for it. He was working her land, fixing her wagon. He was the fool all over again. "You are very good," he whispered, a new, cold anger dawning in his eyes. Kelly recoiled. The look on his face had changed. The grudging respect was gone, replaced by a cold, familiar suspicion. What are you talking about?" "The defiant widow," he said, his voice a soft, cruel mockery. "The hard-working mother, the one who will not be beaten. It is a fine performance. The stew, the thanks, even the cuts on your hands. It is all part of it. Is it not you saw a rich man, and you thought you would play him for a fool?" She stared at him, all the blood draining from her face. She was so shocked, so utterly blindsided by the accusation, that she could not speak. "Well, I am not a fool," he said, stepping so close he could see the panic rising in her eyes. "Not again. I have been played by a woman before. Mrs. Bishop, it will not happen a second time. I will fix your wagon. I will take you to town. I will take my $800, and then I will be gone. And if you are $1 short, $1, I will take this land, and I will burn this cabin to the ground with my own hands. Do you understand me?" Kelly found her voice. It was not a scream. It was a low, shaking, terrible sound. "Get out." "It is my barn," he reminded her. "Get away from me," she spat, her hand clenching into a fist. She looked so violated, so deeply insulted, that for a second, his certainty wavered. But he held on to his anger. It was his shield. It was the wall of his fortress. "We start threshing at dawn," he said, his voice cold and final. He turned and stalked back to the barn, leaving her shaking by the pump. He was in control again. He was the creditor. She was the debtor. He had named her game. He had seen the trap. He entered the barn and kicked a bale of hay. A sudden, violent act that startled the cow. He was safe. He was hard. He was Bo Callahan. But as he sank onto his bedroll, the smell of her harvest on his skin, he could not escape the image of her face, the look of utter, profound betrayal. It was not the face of a manipulator. It was the face of an honest woman who had just been accused of a crime she could not even comprehend. He had built his wall back up, but he had the terrible sinking feeling that he had just aimed his cannons at the wrong person. Bo did not find sleep easily. He lay on the hay bale bedroll, the barn dark and close around him, and he listened to the small, miserable sounds of the night, the creak of the old timbers, the stamp of the milk cow, and, filtering from the cabin, the sound of a child coughing, a dry, persistent hack that seemed to needle its way directly into his conscience. His anger had cooled, leaving behind a sour, metallic taste. It had been his shield, his reliable defense against the world, and he had used it. He had swung it like a club, and he had seen the look on her face when it landed, the look of utter, profound betrayal. It was not the look of a manipulator. It was not the look of a schemer. It was the look of a woman who had been struck to the soul. He had accused her of being Catherine. He had taken her pride, her defiance, her sheer, unbending strength, and he had twisted it into a cheap, bartered commodity. He had wanted to hurt her, to push her away, to reestablish the cold, clear lines of creditor and debtor. He had succeeded. The silence from the cabin was as thick and cold as a winter fog. He finally drifted into a tormented, shallow sleep, and the past came for him. He was not in Wyoming. He was in a fancy hotel in Denver, the kind with red velvet wallpaper and gold tassels. The air was thick with cigar smoke and the smell of whiskey. He was younger, only 28, but he felt like a king. He was wearing a new suit, the $40 one, and he was there with Catherine. Catherine, her hair was the color of a dark sunset, and her laugh could make a man believe in angels. She was soft, all curves and whispers, and she looked at him like he was the only man in the world. She told him he was strong. She told him he was smart. She told him he was her savior. Just $20,000. Bo, she was whispering, her hand on his chest, her eyes pleading and wet. It is not for me. It is for my brother. He is a good man. Bo, he made a mistake. A gambler. He threatened him. They will kill him if I do not help. He, Bo Callahan, who could read a contract like a preacher read a Bible, had believed her. He, who could smell a bad deal a mile away, had drowned in the scent of her perfume. He had given her the money, $20,000, a fortune. The dream shifted. He was opening the hotel room door. He was holding a box with a pearl necklace inside. The room was empty. The scent of her perfume was gone, replaced by the smell of a cheap cigar. A note was on the pillow. Do not look for me. The gambler was not my brother. Thank you for the steak. See. He was not just humiliated. He was annihilated. It was not the money. It was the ease of it. He had been played. His strength, his intelligence, his entire fortress had been dismantled by a soft voice and a well-practiced lie. He had not been a savior. He had been the fool. The dream shifted again. He was standing in the empty room, the note in his hand. He heard a laugh. He turned. It was not Catherine. It was Kelly Mae Bishop. She was standing in the doorway, her face dirty, her hair full of chaff. But she was wearing Catherine's red velvet dress. She was laughing, that same light, cruel laugh. You are an empty place, she said, her voice a mixture of Catherine's lilt and her own rough-edged words. You are just a fool, an empty, predictable fool. I saw you coming, Mr. Callahan. He woke up with a roar, sitting bolt upright in the hay. His heart was pounding so hard it felt like a fist trying to break out of his chest. He was covered in a cold sweat. The barn was pitch black, the air cold. The child in the cabin was still coughing. He put his head in his hands. his body shaking. It had not been Kelly in that dream. It had been him, the cruel words he had spoken to her, accusing her of manipulation, of playing him. They were not his. They were the ghosts of his past. They were Catherine's words, Catherine's actions, and he had thrown them at a woman who was the exact opposite. Catherine had been soft, a creature of lies and weakness. Kelly was hard, forged from truth and a strength he had never before witnessed. He had been so terrified of being played, so blinded by the memory of his own humiliation, that he had become the one thing he swore he would never be. He had become a bully. He had become a coward. He sat in the dark for over an hour, the shame so thick it was almost choking him. He had built his fortress of distrust, and it had not kept the world out. It had only locked him inside, alone, with his own ghosts. He had looked at the one woman in 10 years who was his equal in strength, his superior in courage, and he had called her a whore. When the first pale, sickly light of dawn crept through the cracks in the barn, he rose. He felt hollowed out, exhausted. He did not know how to fix what he had broken. Words were useless. An apology would be an insult. He would work. He would fix the wagon. He would get her grain to town. It was the only thing he had left, an action, a piece of hard, physical truth. He emerged from the barn. The air was cold and still. Day 6. She was already at it. She had laid a large canvas tarp on the ground and was threshing the wheat, beating the bundled stalks against a wooden crate, the grains separating from the chaff. She was working with a furious, desperate, silent energy. She heard him, but she did not look up. She did not acknowledge his presence. She just kept working, the thud, thud, thud of the wheat striking the crate the only sound. He was invisible to her. He was worse than the creditor. He was nothing. The wagon wheel was in worse shape than he thought. The axle was splintered. The wheel itself cracked. It would take all day. He set to work, his movements methodical, his mind quiet. He used her husband's few rusty tools. He cut wood, he chiseled, he hammered. He lost himself in the simple physics of the work. The thud of her threshing was a rhythm in the background, a constant reminder of his failure. Around noon, he was fitting a new piece of hardwood into the wheel hub. He was sweating, despite the cool air. He heard it before he saw it. Horses, more than one. He looked up. It was not Jack. 3 men were riding into the yard. They were town men, not ranchers. He recognized them from the saloon in Laramie, loafers, men who lived on whiskey and casual cruelty. Their leader was a man named Silas, a big, loud-mouthed braggart with a mean streak. Kelly saw them. She dropped the bundle of wheat. Her entire body went rigid. She looked at Bo, her eyes wide, not with fear for herself, but with a new, sudden terror. Then she turned to the cabin. "Samuel Jr.," she shrieked, her voice high with panic. "Get the children inside. Lock the door. Do not come out." The boy, who had been watching, scrambled inside, a pale blur. The 3 men dismounted, laughing. They did not seem to see Bo, who was half hidden by the wagon. Their eyes were on Kelly. "Well, well," Silas drawled, unhitching his gun belt. He let it hang loose on his hip. His eyes roamed over Kelly's body, lingering on her torn dress, her legs, her chest. "Looky here, boys. The grieving widow bishop. Heard old Sam finally found the bottom of a bottle in the bottom of a creek." The other 2 men chuckled, fanning out. "What do you want, Silas?" Kelly's voice was shaking, but she did not retreat. She stood her ground between the men and her cabin, her hands clenched at her sides. "Just paying a neighborly call. Kelly May." One of the others snickered. "Heard you was all alone out here. A pretty young thing like you." "It must be awful lonely," Silas said, taking a step closer. He was enjoying this. 5 kids, that's a handful. Must be hard to manage, all by your lonesome. We heard Bo Callahan was out here. Figured he'd have taken the place and run you off by now, but it looks like he is gone. And you are still here." He took another step. Looks to me like you need some protection. Ma'am, some real protection. He reached out, his dirty hand aiming for her arm. Take your hand off her. Beau's voice was not a shout. It was a low, cold growl like grinding stone. It cut through the air and stopped Silas cold. The three men spun around. They were stunned. Beau Callahan was standing by the wagon, covered in grease and sawdust. He was holding a heavy wheel hammer. He did not look like the rich rancher from the bank. He looked like something primal. "Mr. Callahan," Silas stammered, his face instantly losing its leering smile. We was just funnin'. We did not mean no harm." "You were just leaving," Beau said. He took one slow step forward. The hammer hung at his side, balanced perfectly in his grip. He was perfectly, terrifyingly calm. "Now, see here," one of the other men tried, trying to recover his bluster. "She is just a widow. No call to She is under my protection." The words came out before Beau had time to think about them. They were not about business. They were not about a contract. They were a simple, immovable truth. Silas's eyes widened, and a new, leering, ugly understanding dawned on his face. "Your protection," he laughed, a nervous, high-pitched sound. Oh, I see. You are not here for the debt after all. Callahan, you are here for the assets." He made a crude gesture with his hand. "Got yourself a fine new arrangement." Beau moved. He was not a man who moved fast. He was a man who moved with deliberation. But this was different. This was a single, fluid explosion of rage. He crossed the yard in 3 long strides. He did not use the hammer. His left hand, the one he had braced the axle with, shot out and grabbed Silas by the throat. He was a powerful man, and his grip was like a steel trap. He slammed Silas back against his own horse. Hard. The horse whinnied, rearing in panic. "I will say this one time," Beau snarled, his face inches from Silas's, his voice a whisper of pure, unadulterated violence. "The next words that come out of your mouth will determine if you ever speak again." He squeezed. Silas's eyes bulged. He clawed at Beau's wrist, his boots scrabbling in the dirt. Get off him," the other 2 men shouted, fumbling for their holsters. "Go ahead," Beau said, his voice dangerously soft. He never took his eyes off Silas. "Draw. See what happens. But I promise you, he will be dead before you clear leather. And then I will deal with you." The men froze, their hands hovered over their guns. They knew Beau Callahan. They knew his reputation for cold-blooded business. But this was not business. This was something else. This was a side of him they had never seen. And it was terrifying. Beau looked back at Silas, whose face was turning a deep, blotchy purple. "You will get on your horse. You will ride out of here. You will not come back. You will not speak her name again. If I hear one word, one whisper, in any saloon about this, I will find you." He shoved Silas, hard. Silas crumpled to the ground, gasping, choking, rubbing his throat. "Ooh, we're leaving," Silas choked out, scrambling to his feet. "We're leaving." The 3 men scrambled onto their horses, clumsy in their haste. They did not look back. They kicked their horses into a frantic run, disappearing in a cloud of alkali dust. Absolute silence descended on the yard. The only sound was the wind, and Beau's own harsh breathing. The hammer was still in his hand. The adrenaline was afire in his veins. He turned, slowly. Kelly was standing exactly where she had been. Her face was as white as sun-bleached bone. She was staring at him, her eyes wide, her mouth slightly open. The terror was still there, but it was mixed with a profound, shattering confusion. She was looking at him, not as a creditor, not as a tyrant, not as her accuser. She was looking at him as her defender. He let the hammer drop from his hand. It hit the dust with a soft, final thud. He looked at her. He looked at the cabin door, where 5 small, pale faces were pressed against the glass. He looked at the empty prairie where the men had been, and in that one blinding, clarifying moment, he knew. He knew that his dream had been a warning. He knew that his accusations last night had been the last, desperate act of a dying part of himself. He knew that his defense of her had nothing to do with a broken wagon wheel or a pile of wheat. He had not been protecting an asset. He had been protecting her. The fortress wall, the one he had spent his entire life building, the one he had been so desperately trying to patch, was gone. It had not just been breached. It had been leveled. And the empty place inside him, the one she had named, was not empty anymore. It was full. It was full of a terrifying, powerful, and undeniable feeling. He was Beau Callahan, and he was, God help him, in love. The dust settled slowly in the yard, returning to the earth as if nothing had happened. The thunder of the horses' hooves faded into the distance, swallowed by the vast, indifferent prairie. In the silence that remained, Beau Callahan's harsh breathing was the only sound. He was still vibrating with the adrenaline, with the cold, clean rage that had flooded him. The hammer felt heavy in his hand, a dead weight. He turned. Kelly May Bishop had not moved. She was a statue carved from salt, her face as white as the alkali dust at her feet. She was staring at him, but her eyes were not focused. She was looking at the space he occupied, at the man who had just exploded with a violence so profound it had changed the shape of the air. She was looking at him, and for the first time, she was not seeing a creditor. She was not seeing an accuser. She was seeing a protector, and the two images would not reconcile in her mind. The cabin door creaked open. A small, fearful sound. Samuel Jr., his face pale and pinched, peered out. "Ma," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Ma, are they gone?" The boy's voice broke the spell. Kelly flinched, her whole body jerking as if waking from a nightmare. She took a shuddering breath and turned toward the cabin. "Yes, Sammy," she said, her voice a dry crackle. "They are gone. Stay inside. Lock the door." She heard the bolt slide home. Then she turned back to Beau. She looked at the hammer he still held. She looked at the raw, greasy knuckles of the hand he had used to throttle Silas. She looked at his face, which was still dark with the remnants of his fury. She did not know who he was. The man who had accused her of being a whore, and the man who had just defended her honor with the threat of death, were the same person. The contradiction was terrifying. Beau looked at his own hand, the one that had held the hammer. He opened his fingers and let the tool drop into the dust. The sound was small, final. He felt strangely hollow, the rage draining out of him, leaving behind only the stark, undeniable truth of what he had done. "You are all right," he said. It was not a question. It was a statement, a command. She nodded, a tiny, jerky movement. She was shaking now, the adrenaline leaving her, the cold terror seeking back in. "They will not be back," he said, his voice a low gravel. It was a promise. He bent, picked up the hammer, and turned back to the wagon, his movements stiff. He needed to do something. He needed to hit something, to fix something. The silence was too loud. You would have killed him," she whispered. Her voice was full of awe and horror. Beau stopped, his back to her. He braced one hand against the broken wheel. "Yes," he said. The word was flat. It was the truth. He had been perfectly, calmly, willing to end a man's life. For her. "Why?" she asked, the word torn from her. He did not turn. He could not look at her. He could not tell her the truth that was blazing in his own chest. "No man," he said, his voice rough, "has the right to speak to a woman that way, to threaten a family." It was a piece of the truth. It was the only piece he dared to offer. He heard her take a small, ragged breath. He heard her footsteps as she turned and walked, unsteadily, back into the cabin. The door closed. The bolt slid home. He was alone again. He hit the axle with the hammer, a single savage blow that sent a shock up his arm. The rest of the day passed in a new kind of silence. It was not the angry, brittle silence of the days before. It was a thick, heavy, aware silence. Bo worked on the wagon with a focused, desperate intensity. He was not just fixing a wheel. He was trying to rebuild his own world. He had just discovered a fundamental flaw in his own foundation. He, Bo Callahan, who valued cold logic above all, had just acted on pure, raw, unthinking emotion, and it terrified him. From the corner of his eye, he could see her. She had returned to the canvas tarp. She was threshing the wheat, the thud, thud, thud of the stalks against the crate, a frantic, unsteady rhythm. She was working as if the devils of hell were after her. She was trying to outrun the image of what she had just seen. They were acutely, painfully aware of each other. He would stop to wipe the sweat from his eyes, and his gaze would be drawn to her. He saw the way her back bent, the vulnerable curve of her neck, the raw, bleeding cuts on her arms. He no longer saw a performance. He saw a woman who was hanging on by a thread, and he was the man who had almost cut it, and then, inexplicably, tied it into a knot. She would stop to catch her breath, and she would watch him. She saw the sheer, animal power in his shoulders as he levered the new axle into place. She saw the grease on his hands, the focus in his profile. She was terrified of him, and yet the terror that had filled her when Silas rode in, it was gone. She was looking at the most dangerous man she had ever met, and she felt, for the first time since her husband's death, safe. The contradiction made her feel dizzy. By late afternoon, the wagon was fixed, the wheel was solid, the axle greased. The last of the wheat was threshed, a surprisingly large pile of golden grain on the tarp. Bo was at the pump, washing the black grease from his hands. The cold water felt good. He was exhausted. The cabin door opened. He did not look up, but his shoulders tensed. She walked toward him, her steps hesitant. He kept washing his hands, scrubbing at a stubborn spot of grease. He was afraid to look at her, afraid of what he would see in her eyes. She stopped a few feet away. He could feel her presence. "It is done," she said. Her voice was quiet, worn thin. "The wagon is," he said, his voice rough. He scrubbed his hands harder. I have some stew left," she said, "from last night. It is not much." He stopped scrubbing. He let his hands fall to his sides. He slowly turned to face her. "Kelly," he said. He used her first name. It felt strange, intimate. "About what I said the night before last." She flinched, her eyes closing for a brief second, as if he had raised a hand to her. "Stop, please. You do not need to." "Yes, I do," he said, and his voice was raw with a shame that was new to him. "I need to. What I said to you, it was—" He searched for the word. "It was the act of a coward. I was afraid, and I put my own ghosts on you." He took a step closer. She did not back away. "I told you I was played by a woman. Catherine, that was the truth. She was soft. She was a liar. She used weakness as a weapon. And I was a fool. I swore I would never be that fool again." He looked at her, his eyes begging her to understand. "And then I met you. You are not soft. You are the strongest person I have ever known. You do not use weakness. You use truth. You use strength. And I was so terrified of being a fool again. I did not see it. I did not see you. I saw her. And I am sorry." Kelly stared at him. Her lips parted. This confession, this raw, unadorned apology, was more shocking than his violence. It was more intimate than a touch. "You are not the man I thought you were," she whispered. I thought you were just cold, a man made of paper and numbers." I was, he said. I tried to be. It was safe. You are not safe, she said, her voice trembling slightly. You are. The most dangerous man I have ever met, Bo Callahan. Who am I, then? He asked, his voice low. I do not know, she whispered. I do not know what you are. A silence settled between them. The sun was dipping low, and the air was turning cool. Day 7 was tomorrow. The last day. We have to load the wagon, she said, finally. If we are to get to town tomorrow, we will load it now, he said. They worked together in the fading light. The grain was heavy, filling old flour sacks. It was a 2-person job. He would lift a sack, and she would be there, holding the next one open. He would hoist one onto the wagon bed, and she would be there to help him position it. They moved in a clumsy, unspoken rhythm, their bodies brushing against each other in the small space. It took over an hour. They were both covered in fine, itchy chaff. They were both breathing hard. The last sack was loaded. Bo tied the canvas cover down, his hands sure and quick. He turned. She was standing right behind him, by the wagon wheel. She was looking at the loaded wagon, at the physical proof of their labor. It was a small mountain of hope. It is done, she said, her voice catching. She looked at him. Will it? Will it be enough, the $800? Bo looked at the wagon. He did a quick, practiced calculation in his head. The price of wheat in Laramie, the weight. It would be close. It might even be short by $50. It will be enough, he said. His voice was firm. He had just made the decision. She knew it. She saw it in his eyes. She saw the moment he decided to alter the math. You are lying, she whispered. It is short. I can see it. You are just saying that. No, he said, taking a step toward her. I will get the price. It will be enough. I will not leave here until it is. And that was what broke her. Not the threats, not the cruelty, not the violence. It was this simple, unadorned act of grace. The tears she had refused to shed, the ones she had swallowed down with her pride, they came. She did not sob. She just wept, silent, heavy tears that cut clean paths through the dust and chaff on her cheeks. She put her raw, bleeding hands over her face, her shoulders shaking with the force of her relief, her exhaustion, her confusion. Bo's heart, the one he had thought was a dead, useless muscle, felt like it was being squeezed in a vice. He could not stand it. Kelly, he said, his voice a low, rough sound. He reached out. He did not grab her. He placed his hand on her shoulder. The fabric of her dress was thin, and he could feel the small, trembling bone beneath his palm. She flinched, a small, startled bird, but she did not pull away. She leaned into his touch, just a fraction of an inch, as if she had forgotten how to stand on her own. He used his other hand, the one that was still stained with grease, and he gently, firmly, tilted her chin up. He forced her to look at him. Her face was a ruin, wet with tears, streaked with dirt. Her blue eyes were wide, unguarded, and drowning. He was lost. Last night, he whispered, his voice thick, when I accused you of playing me, that was the last lie I will ever tell you. He lowered his head. He was not thinking about contracts. He was not thinking about Catherine, or debt, or water rights. He was not thinking at all. He was just feeling. He kissed her. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a collision. It was 6 days of anger and shame and a desperate, unnamed hunger. His lips were chapped and rough, and she tasted of salt from her tears and wheat dust and a deep, surprising warmth. He gripped her shoulder, his fingers digging in, pulling her closer. His other hand moved from her chin to her hair, tangling in the loose, wheat-colored strands, his fingers finding the shape of her skull. She made a small, shocked sound in the back of her throat, a gasp of protest or surrender, or both, and then her hands, her raw, cut, bleeding hands, came up and fisted in the front of his shirt. She was not pushing him away. She was clinging to him. She was holding on as if he were the only solid thing in a world that had just dissolved beneath her feet. It was a kiss that was not about softness. It was about truth. It was a desperate, primal admission. It was the tearing down of the last wall. He broke the kiss, but he did not let her go. He rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed. They were both breathing raggedly, their breath mingling in the cold twilight. The world had shifted on its axis. The contract was a piece of ash. The debt was a joke. "Catherine?" he breathed, his voice a low rasp against her skin. "The woman who fooled me. She took $20,000 from me, and she cost me nothing. She just took paper." He pulled back just enough to look at her, his dark eyes burning into hers. "You, Kelly, you have cost me everything." She looked confused. Her tears stopped, her eyes wide with his intensity. "What I will pay you, the $800. "No," he said, shaking his head. He grabbed her hands, the raw, bleeding ones, and he turned them over, looking at the calluses, the cuts. "You cost me my anger. You cost me my pride. You cost me the cold." He lifted her hands and pressed his lips to her raw knuckles, a gesture of reverence that shattered them both. "I came here to collect a debt," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I came here because I thought I was a rich man. I thought I had everything." He looked at her, and the truth, the whole terrifying truth, finally came out. "I did not know what poverty was until I met you, and I did not know what wealth was until this moment." "Beau," she whispered, her voice shaking, I do not understand." "I love you, Kelly May Bishop," he said. The words were out, the final, fortress-leveling truth. "I do not know how it happened. I do not know what it means. It is a feeling I do not trust. I have spent my whole life not trusting it." He looked terrified, more scared than he had been when facing Silas's gun. "I am terrified of it. I am terrified of you. You are stronger than I am. And you see me." Kelly looked at this powerful, magnificent, broken man. He was the winter, he was the storm, and he was now this. "I was terrified of you," she admitted, her voice so low he barely heard it. "You came here to destroy me. You were like the wind, just cold." "I was," he said. He looked at her, his gaze softening, taking in every line of her face. "I was, but I am not anymore." He released her hands. The moment was broken, but the air was changed. It was charged with a new, terrifying, beautiful reality. We should feed your children," he said, falling back on the only thing that made sense. A simple, practical act. "And I will sleep in the barn. We leave for Laramie at dawn." She just nodded, unable to speak. She watched him walk away, his back straight, his step sure. He was still Beau Callahan, the richest man in the territory, but he was no longer her creditor. He was no longer her enemy. He was the man who had just taken her life, and his own, and smashed them both to pieces. And she knew, with a certainty that was as frightening as it was thrilling, that nothing would ever be the same. The dawn of the 7th day was cold and sharp, the sky a pale, unforgiving gray. The world felt new and terrifying. The kiss had not been spoken of. It hung in the air between them, a tangible thing, as real as the wagon, as heavy as the wheat. It was a new contract, one neither of them had signed, and one neither of them knew how to read. Beau had risen from the barn, his face a mask of careful neutrality. He had hitched the mules to the wagon, his movements precise, almost violent in their efficiency. He was a man building a wall against the feelings of the night before, but the mortar was not setting. Kelly had emerged from the cabin, her face pale, her eyes shadowed with exhaustion. She had not slept. She had spent the night staring at the rafters, the feel of his lips on hers a brand, a claim. She had spent her life fighting. She did not know how to surrender, and she did not know if that kiss had been a surrender or just a new, more confusing kind of battle. The most difficult part was leaving the children. She gathered them on the porch. The little one was coughing, her face flushed with fever. Kelly's heart felt like it was being torn in two. "Samuel Jr.," she said, her voice rough. She knelt and gripped his thin shoulders, forcing him to meet her eyes. He was 7 years old, going on 40. "You are the man of the house. You keep this door locked. You do not open it, for anyone, not for Jack, not for anyone but me. You keep the fire low. You give your sister the medicine." She pointed to a small bottle on the shelf. "I will be back by dark." The boy's face was pale, his eyes wide with the terror of the responsibility, but he nodded. "Yes, Ma, I will." Bo watched from the wagon. He saw the sacrifice. He saw the terror in her eyes, the sheer, agonizing cost of this one day, this one last chance. He had never, in his entire life, had to make a choice that cost him anything more than money. He turned his face away, a muscle working in his jaw. She climbed up onto the wagon seat. She did not look at him. She was a statue of pure, focused will. "Go," she said. Bo snapped the reins, and the heavy wagon lurched forward, the wheels groaning. They began the long, slow, 16-mile journey to Laramie. For the first 2 hours, they did not speak. The only sounds were the creak of the wagon, the plodding of the mules, and the high, lonely cry of a hawk. They sat a foot apart on the hard wooden bench, but the space between them was electric. They were intensely, painfully aware of every small movement, every shift of weight, every breath. Bo's mind was a battlefield. The man he had been, the cold, logical man of ledgers, was at war with the man who had kissed her. The old Bo Callahan was screaming at him, "She is a debtor. This is a weakness. She has played you. You are a fool, a fool, a fool." The new man, the one who had felt the truth in her raw hands, simply said, "I do not care." He looked at her out of the corner of his eye. Her profile was set, her gaze fixed on the horizon. She was clutching her hands together in her lap, her knuckles white. She was terrified. She was trying to calculate the odds, just as he was. She was praying. "The girl," Bo said, his voice startling in the silence. "The medicine. Will it be enough?" Kelly flinched, startled. "It is a cough syrup from the doctor in town. It eases it. The fever is what worries me." "It will break by midday." Bo said it was a statement of fact. "How do you know?" she asked, her voice a whisper. "I have seen it," he said. "In calving sheds, in bunkhouses. A fever either breaks or it wins. Hers will break. She is strong, like her mother." She turned to look at him then. He was staring straight ahead, his hands firm on the reins. It was the first time he had offered her comfort, not a solution, not a business term, just comfort. She did not know how to receive it. She just nodded and looked back at the horizon, her throat tight. The sun climbed. The day grew warmer. They reached the edge of town, the wagon wheels hitting the hard-packed dirt of the main street. The town was alive with noise, with men and horses and commerce. Kelly shrank into herself. She felt small. She was in a patched dress, her hair full of chaff, her hands a ruin. She was sitting next to the most powerful man in the territory, and she felt like a piece of dirt on his boot. Bo seemed to grow. He sat taller. This was his world. He was the king here. He navigated the wagon through the traffic with an easy, arrogant authority. Pulling up in front of the Laramie Grain and Feed store, a man in a dusty apron, a Mr. Henderson, came out, wiping his hands. "Mr. Callahan, did not expect to see you driving a wagon." "I am here on business," Henderson. Bo said, swinging down. His voice was all iron again. Cold, pure business. I have a load of prime wheat, and I want top dollar. Henderson looked at Kelly, who was still on the seat, and then at the wagon. He smirked. This is, what, 2 acres from the old Bishop place? It is, Bo said, his voice flat. And you will weigh it, and you will give me the best price, or I will take it to Cheyenne. And I will remember this conversation when you come to me next month, asking to extend your note at the bank. Henderson's smirk vanished. He was one of Bo's debtors. Too, everyone was. Now, Mr. Callahan, no need for that. Of course, top dollar. Let's get her on the scale. Kelly watched, her heart pounding. She had not understood. Bo was not just her creditor. He was everyone's. He held the strings to this entire town. She watched him work. He was magnificent. He was a general. He supervised the weighing. He argued over the moisture content. He demanded a recount. He did not ask. He commanded. And he did it all, she realized. For her. He was fighting for every last penny. He was using the same ruthless power that he had once aimed at her. And he had turned it into a shield, protecting her, fighting for her. Finally, Henderson sighed, defeated. All right, Callahan, you win. It is clean. It is heavy. $752. That is my final offer. It is more than I am giving anyone else. Bo was silent for a long moment. He looked at the grain. He had made his own calculation. It was a fair price. It was, as he had known, not enough. Fine, Bo said, cash. Henderson counted out the money into a canvas pouch. He handed it to Bo. Bo turned and walked to the wagon. He looked up at Kelly. She was as white as a sheet. She had heard the number, $752. She was $48 short. She had failed. After everything, after the work, the blood, the fight, she had failed. She closed her eyes, the tears burning hot behind them. She had lost. Bo held up the pouch. His face was unreadable. This is the money for the wheat, Mrs. Bishop. She opened her eyes. She would not cry. Not here, not in front of him. She held out her hand, her movements wooden, and took the pouch. It was heavy, the heaviest thing she had ever held. It was the price of her failure. It is not enough, she whispered. No, Bo said, his voice quiet. It is not. This was it, the moment of truth. He had the right. The contract was clear. He could take the money as partial payment, and he could take the land. He had given her a chance. She had failed. The old Bo Callahan, the man of ledgers, would do just that. It was the law. He looked at her. He saw the defeat in her eyes. He saw the raw, red cuts on her hands, the ones she had gotten bundling his wheat. He saw the shadow of her sick child. He saw the woman who had stood on a porch and called him an empty place. He made his choice. Let's go to the bank, he said. She was confused. The bank, but why I do not have the rest? You won. Get down, he said, his voice not unkind. We are finishing this. She slid down from the seat, her legs unsteady. She followed him, clutching the pouch. She felt like she was walking to the gallows. He was going to foreclose. He was just doing it in front of the bankers, to make it final. They walked into the First National Bank of Laramie. The place went silent. Every teller, every clerk, stopped what they were doing. Bo Callahan was here. Bo walked to the head teller, a small, nervous man named Peters. The Bishop note, Bo said. The one I hold. Get it. Yes, Mr. Callahan. Right away. Mr. Callahan. Peters scrambled into the vault and returned, holding the single piece of paper that represented her life. He handed it to Bo. Bo took the note. He looked at it. $800, signed by Samuel Bishop. He then looked at Kelly. She was standing there, shaking, her eyes on the floor. Mrs. Bishop, he said. She looked up. The money, he said, holding out his hand. Numbly, she handed him the pouch. He took the pouch and set it on the counter. He took the note. Mr. Peters, he said, his voice clear and loud, filling the silent bank. I am here to settle this account. Peters licked his lips. But, Mr. Callahan, the payment? It is $800. The note, Bo said, his voice cutting, was for $800. However, I have incurred expenses against the property. He pulled a pencil from his pocket. He turned the note over. He began to write, his voice a low, clear rumble, a narration of his judgment. For services rendered in protecting the asset at the Dry Creek homestead, fence repair, 3 days labor, I value my time, $40. Peters's eyes widened. A repair of water pump, parts and labor, $20. Kelly's head snapped up. She was watching him, her mind unable to grasp what he was doing. Repair of wagon, including new axle housing, milled hardwood, $30. 3 days labor harvesting 2 acres of wheat. My price is $50. He stopped writing and looked at the clerk. And for consultation and security services, yesterday, that I value at $10. He looked at his list. That is a total of $150 in expenses, which I am, as the note holder, deducting from the principal. The remaining balance on this note is $650. He tapped the canvas pouch. This pouch contains $752. Count it, pay the note. The remainder belongs to Mrs. Bishop. Peters was frozen, his jaw slack. He had never seen anything like this. Bo Callahan, the man who would sue his own mother for a nickel, was creating loopholes. He was using the very language of his power, the cold, hard math, to be merciful. Did you hear me? Peters. Bo's voice was a low growl. Yes, sir, right away. Peters snatched the pouch, his hands shaking. He counted the money. He counted it twice. It is $752, sir. Then pay the note, Bo said, and give Mrs. Bishop her change. Peters stamped the note, his hand shaking so hard the paid mark was blurry. He slid the canceled note across the counter. Then he pushed the remaining money toward Kelly, $102. A fortune, a lifetime. Kelly stared at the money. She stared at the note. She looked at Bo. He was not looking at the clerk. He was looking at her. His face was calm, his eyes steady. He had done it. He had not given her charity. He had not insulted her with a gift. He had created a world where she could win. He had rewritten the rules of his own universe. All for her. This is yours, he said, pushing the note toward her. The land, it is yours, free and clear. She reached out a trembling hand and her fingers brushed the paper. It was done. She was free. She looked at him, and the gratitude, the shock, the love. It was so overwhelming. She could not speak. She could not breathe. You, she whispered. You. I told you, he said, his voice so low only she could hear it. You cost me everything. He put his hand on her back, a simple, proprietary, public gesture. Let's go home, Mrs. Bishop. He did not just mean her home. He meant theirs. He guided her out of the bank, leaving the entire staff in stunned silence. Love had not just won. It had balanced the ledger. Kelly Mae Bishop walked out of the bank and into the bright, unfeeling sunlight of Laramie. She felt like she had been born again, but her legs were weak, and the world was too loud. In her right hand, she clutched the canvas pouch. It was lighter now, but it felt heavier. It contained $102, her money, a future. In her left hand, she clutched the canceled note. The paper was stiff, the paid stamp a blurry, miraculous, beautiful word. She was free. She had been so focused on the terror of the debt, on the simple, animalistic drive to survive, that she had never once considered what came after. And now, after was here. Bo Callahan's hand was still on the small of her back. It was a gesture of simple, proprietary guidance. But on the main street of Laramie, it was a thunderclap. Men stopped. Women, peering from behind the curtains of the mercantile, froze. Bo Callahan, a man who moved through the world alone, was touching the bishop widow. Not just touching her, but steering her, as if she belonged to him. He guided her to the wagon, his face a mask of iron neutrality. As if he had not just rearranged the financial laws of the territory, he helped her up onto the seat, his hand strong and warm on her elbow. The intimacy of it, after the violence of his kiss, after the shock of his mercy, made her dizzy. She expected him to climb up, to take them home. Instead, he tied his horse to the back of the wagon. "Stay here," he said. It was not a request. She watched him stride into the mercantile, the same store where she had, weeks ago, begged for credit and been refused. He was in there for 10 minutes. He emerged with 2 heavy crates. He loaded them onto the wagon bed himself, the store owner, Mr. Henderson, scrambling behind him, carrying a third, smaller box. "Just put it all on my account, Henderson," Bo said. "Of course, Mr. Callahan, anything you say." Kelly looked into the crates. Flour, a side of bacon, lard, a 50-pound sack of beans, coffee, sugar, and in the small box, bottles of medicine, a large one with a doctor's label for a cough and quinine for fever. He had bought her an arsenal for survival. He climbed up onto the seat beside her. He untied the reins. You did not have to do that," Kelly whispered, her throat tight. "The children are sick," he said, his voice flat. He snapped the reins, and the wagon moved. I have money," she said, holding up the canvas pouch. $102. I can pay for it." He did not look at her. He kept his eyes on the mules, guiding them through the midday traffic. "No," he said. "Why?" she asked, her voice trembling. Is this another expense, another investment?" She hated the pleading sound in her voice, but she had to know. "No," he said. His voice was rough. "It is a gift." The word hung in the air, as shocking as his kiss, a gift, from a man who had told her he was not a good man. The ride home was a new kind of silence. The tension of the morning, the sharp, agonizing fear, was gone. It had been replaced by a quiet so profound, so heavy with unsaid things, that it was almost louder. They were 2 strangers, bound together by a week of violence, labor, and a single, desperate kiss. The old roles were gone. Creditor, debtor. They were just a man and a woman, and neither of them knew what that meant. They were 2 miles out of town when she finally found her voice. She had to... "You lied," she said, her voice small. Bo's hands tightened on the reins. "I do not lie." "In the bank," she clarified, her courage rising. You invented those charges, consultation and security services. You just made that up. You lied for me." He was silent for a long time, the creak of the wagon wheels filling the void. "I reallocated the assets to balance the account," he said, his voice stiff. He was falling back on the old words, the iron language of the ledger. "Stop," she said. She put her hand on his arm. He flinched as if she had burned him. He pulled the mules to a halt. They sat in the middle of the vast, empty prairie. The wind whispered through the sagebrush. He turned to look at her, and his face was not the face of the banker or the rancher. It was the face of the man who had kissed her. It was unguarded. It was afraid. "Do not," she said, her voice shaking. "Do not hide behind those words anymore. Not with me. You stood in that bank, and you saved me after you called me a..." She could not say it. You called me a liar. You called me a whore." His face contorted in a spasm of shame. He looked down at his own hands, the ones that were gripping the reins. "Kelly!" "Why?" she asked, the tears that had been threatening all day finally welling in her eyes. "Why do that? Why be so cruel? And then, why be so kind? I do not understand you. I do not know who you are." "I am a fool," he said, his voice a low, rough rasp. "That is who I am. I was a fool for Catherine, and I was a fool last night when I said those things to you." He dropped the reins and turned fully on the seat, taking her by the shoulders. His grip was not violent, but it was inescapable. That man, the one who said those things, he was terrified. He was the ghost of that 17-year-old boy, the one who swore he would never be hurt again. He was the man who was played for $20,000. He looked into her eyes, and she saw the raw, unhealed wound he had been hiding his whole life. "When I kissed you," he said, his voice thick, "I was not thinking. I was just feeling, and it terrified me. I thought it was another trap. I thought my own heart was betraying me. So I attacked. I tried to make you ugly, so I would not feel." "Feel what?" she whispered. "This," he said. He leaned in, and he kissed her again. This kiss was not the collision of the night before. It was not the desperate, hungry, angry kiss in the twilight. This was slow. It was tender. It was a question and an answer. It was a man, stripped of all his armor, admitting his own defeat. His lips were soft, questioning. He tasted of coffee and the dust of the road. When he pulled back, he rested his forehead against hers. "I meant what I said. Kelly, I love you. It is a sickness in me. I do not know how to be this man, but I cannot be the other one. Not anymore. Not since I met you." She looked at him, at this powerful, broken man, and the last of her fear dissolved. She had seen him at his worst. She had seen him accuse her, threaten her, and she had seen him defend her. She had seen him break his own rules, his own iron code. For her, the forgiveness, she realized, was not even a question. It was just a fact. She could not forgive him, because she saw him. I am afraid, too," she whispered, her hands coming up to rest on his chest. You own the world. Bo, I own a patch of dirt and 5 children." "No," he said, his voice fierce. He grabbed her hand, the one with the raw cuts, and he held it up between them. "I own paper. I own cattle. It is nothing. It is an empty place. You own a home. You own a family. You have that boy, Samuel. He stood up to me. You have love." He said the word as if it were foreign, something he was learning to pronounce. "That is the wealth. Kelly, I was just too blind to see it." He kissed her again, gently. "I do not want your land. I do not want your money. I want you." The ride back to the homestead was quiet, but it was a new quiet. It was the quiet of a new beginning, a fragile, unspoken understanding. When they crested the last ridge, the sun was setting, bleeding fire across the sky. Kelly saw the cabin, and her heart leaped into her throat. She saw smoke. She saw the children on the porch, waiting. She jumped from the wagon before it had fully stopped, stumbling as she ran. "Samuel!" The cabin door flew open. "Ma!" The children poured out, a wave of small, thin bodies. They swarmed her. Kelly fell to her knees, gathering them all into her arms, burying her face in their hair. She was crying, deep, racking sobs of pure, unadulterated relief. It was over. It was over. "She is all right, Ma," Samuel Jr. said, his voice high and proud, his small arm around her neck. "The fever broke. Just like you said, it broke at noon. She is hungry." Kelly pulled back, laughing through her tears. She looked at her son. Then she looked up. Bo was still on the wagon seat. He had not moved. He was just watching. He was the outsider. He was looking at this scene of love, this wealth he had just named, and he was not a part of it. He was the man who owned the bank. He was the man who had brought the medicine, but he was not the man who was welcome in the embrace. He saw Kelly look at him, her face wet with tears, her eyes full of a new, complex emotion. He started to unload the supplies, his movements methodical, quiet. He set the heavy crates on the edge of the porch. He did not step onto it. He did not invade their space. The children fell silent, hiding behind their mother's skirts, peering at the monster who had brought them food. Samuel Jr., brave Samuel Jr., stepped forward. He stood between Bo and his mother, his small fists clenched. You leave her be." "Sammy, no," Kelly said, her voice thick. It is all right. This is Mr. Callahan. He helped me. The debt, it is paid. The land is ours." The boy looked at his mother. He looked at Bo. He looked at the crates of food. He could not understand. He helped." Bo looked down at the boy. He saw a miniature version of Kelly. The same defiance, the same strength. "You are a good man, Samuel," Bo said, his voice quiet. "You protected your family. That is the most important job a man has." He set the last box down. He had done his part. The contract was paid. The kiss had been a moment of madness. He was still Bo Callahan, and this was not his home. He turned, walking toward his horse, still tied to the back of the wagon. "I will send Jack Darrow for the wagon in the morning," he said, his back to her. He was already rebuilding the wall. It was safer. "Bo." She had not used Mr. The single word, his name, stopped him cold. He turned. She had taken a step toward him, her children still clinging to her. Where are you going?" "To the ranch," he said. "The business is concluded." She stared at him. After the bank, after the kiss, after his words. He was just leaving. The old terror, the fear of abandonment, rushed back. You cannot sleep in the barn," she said, her voice trembling. He misunderstood her. He thought she was kicking him out. "I am not. I am leaving." "No," she said, and she took another step, her hands clenching at her sides. She was fighting for this, just as she had fought for the land. "That is not what I mean. You said, in the bank. You said, let's go home." He looked at her, and his heart felt like it was going to burst. She had hurt him. She was holding him to it. I meant it," he said, his voice a low rasp. "This is not a home," she said, her voice shaking as she gestured to the broken-down cabin. "It is a shack. It is broken. The barn is broken. I am broken." She looked at him, her blue eyes clear and fierce. "But you are a builder. You fixed the pump. You fixed the wagon." He stood there, frozen, as the meaning of her words settled on him. She was not offering him a night. She was offering him a life, a hard, broken, difficult life. He looked at the cabin. He saw the sagging porch roof. He saw the rickety step, the one he had seen her trip on. He walked past her, to the porch. He put his boot on the broken step and pressed down. It groaned, dangerously loose. "The first thing I am going to do," he said, not looking at her, his voice thick with an emotion he did not know how to name, "is fix this step before one of these children breaks their neck." He turned to look at her. He was not smiling, but his eyes were, "That is, if you will have me." Kelly Mae Bishop looked at the man who had come to destroy her, the man of ice and iron, and she saw, for the first time, the man he truly was, a man who was just as broken, and just as strong as she was. A smile, the first real smile he had ever seen, touched her lips. It was like the sun breaking through a week of storms. I will make some coffee," she whispered. "With the new beans. And Bo." "Yes, you can come inside." Bo Callahan stepped over the threshold. It was the first time he had ever been inside her home. The air was thick and warm and close. It smelled of wood smoke and illness and onions and the undeniable, unfamiliar scent of family. The single room was smaller than his office at the ranch. In the dim light from the fire, he saw the poverty he had only glimpsed from the outside. A single straw mattress in the corner, where 4 small, pale faces watched him with enormous, silent eyes. A rough-hewn table, 2 chairs, a floor of packed earth. Kelly moved past him, her body stiff with a new, awkward tension. She went to the fireplace, her movements jerky. She was a stranger in her own home, now that he was in it. The coffee," she said, her voice low. "I will make it." He stood in the middle of the room, his large frame seeming to suck all the air out of the small space. He was still wearing his suit, now covered in grease, sweat, and chaff. He was a creature of wealth and power, an invader in this world of desperate survival. But he no longer felt like an invader. He felt like a man who had been lost and had just, finally, found a map. "The children," he said, his voice a low gravel. He looked at the mattress. The little girl with the fever was coughing. A weak, shallow sound. "They are all right," Kelly said, her back to him as she measured out the coffee beans. They are just afraid of you." "I know," Bo said. He did not wait for her permission. He walked to the crates of supplies he had set on the floor just inside the door. He opened the smaller box and took out the bottle of Dr. Goodwin's cough medicine. He knelt by the mattress. The children flinched, pulling the single thin blanket up to their chins. Bo looked at Samuel Jr. "She needs this," he said. He did not smile. He did not try to be friendly. He just stated a fact. He held out the bottle. Samuel Jr. looked at his mother. Kelly had turned, the coffee pot in her hand, watching. She nodded, just once. The boy, with all the bravery of a soldier, reached out and took the bottle. "Thank you, sir," he whispered. "You protected them," Bo said to the boy. "You did well." Bo stood up and moved to the table. He sat in one of the rickety chairs. It groaned under his weight. Kelly brought him a tin mug of coffee. It was black and strong and scalding hot. He took it. Their fingers brushed. The jolt was still there. A low, steady current that neither of them knew how to name. They sat in silence while the children whispered. Kelly leaned against the wall, holding her own mug, watching him. She was trying to see the man who had threatened her, the man who had kissed her, and the man who had saved her. All in one person. This is not a home," she said, her voice so low he almost did not hear it. "It is a hovel. It is falling down." Bo took a sip of the coffee. It was the best thing he had ever tasted. "It is a home," he said, his voice firm. You were just lacking materials." He looked at her over the rim of the mug. "I am a builder, Kelly. I know how to build things." She looked at him, and the last of her fear finally, truly, dissolved. It was not a declaration of love. It was a statement of intent. It was a promise. It was the only language he knew, the language of action, of fixing, of making something solid. What will you build?" she whispered. "First," he said, finishing the coffee, "I will build a new step, and then I will build a new wall, and then a new roof. I do not like things that leak." A small, hesitant smile touched her lips. It was a fragile, beautiful thing. "You will be busy." "I plan to be," he said. He did not sleep in the barn. He slept on the floor by the door, his saddle for a pillow, a blanket she gave him pulled over his shoulders. He was a guard. He was a sentinel. He was the protector of the asset. Only the asset was no longer the land. It was the family. The next morning, Jack Darrow arrived, leading a spare horse. He had come for the wagon and for his boss, whom he expected to find triumphant, the foreclosure complete. Instead, he found Bo Callahan, the richest man in Wyoming, on his hands and knees in the dirt, his expensive suit trousers ruined, prying a rotted plank from the porch of the Bishop cabin. Jack sat on his horse for a full minute, his mouth slack. He had known this man for 15 years. He had seen him ruthless. He had seen him angry. He had seen him cold. He had never, not once, seen him look content. "Bo," Jack finally managed, his voice a dry croak. Bo looked up, squinting into the sun. He did not look ashamed. He did not look angry. He looked calm. "Jack, good. I need you." You are not in Cheyenne," Jack said, stating the obvious. "No, the note is paid," Bo said. He stood up, tossing the rotted board aside. "The land belongs to Mrs. Bishop." Jack's weathered face broke into a slow, deep smile. A sunrise he had been waiting 15 years to see. "Paid," he repeated. That must have been some magical wheat." "It was," Bo said, his voice flat. He looked at the cabin, then back at Jack. "I am not returning to the ranch today. I need you to ride back. I need you to send a wagon, a heavy one, with lumber, the best lumber we have, and nails, and tools, all of it." Jack's smile widened. "Lumber for the step." "For the house," Bo said. He looked at the sagging roof, the warped walls. This is inefficient. It will not survive the winter. I am building a new one." "A new house," Jack said, the idea settling on him. "Bo, that is a month's work, maybe 2. "Then send my best crew," Bo ordered. "Send 4 men, and send the sawmill. I want it at the creek by the end of the week. There is timber. We will mill it here." Jack could only stare. The sawmill. He was not just patching, he was building. He was setting down roots. "Yes, sir," Jack said, his voice full of a sudden, deep respect he had not even known he was missing. "A new house. I will see to it." Jack turned to ride off, but Bo's voice stopped him. "And Jack." "Yes, Bo. Pack my other clothes, the work ones. I will be staying in the barn for a while." Jack Darrow nodded, his heart full. "I understand. Bo, I will have it all here by sundown." The next 3 months were a testament to what Bo Callahan, once his mind was set, could do. He did not do things by halves. His crew arrived, and the Dry Creek homestead, once a place of silence and despair, became a place of noise and sweat and progress. Bo did not, as Kelly had half feared, move her and the children to his vast, empty, sterile mansion at the rocking sea. He did not try to make her fit into his world. Instead, he brought his world to hers. He was a builder. He lived in the barn, but he did not eat alone. Every breakfast, every supper, he sat at the rough-hewn table in the cramped, smoky cabin. He sat there while the children, who had slowly accepted his presence, chattered and fought and spilled their milk. He learned their names. He learned that Samuel Jr. was a thinker, quiet and serious. He learned that Sarah, the little girl whose fever had broken, was a giggler. He learned the baby's weight in his arms, a small, warm, solid thing. His men tore down the old, sagging cabin, saving only the field stones from the fireplace, and in its place, they built a house, a real house. It was not a mansion. It was a ranch house, solid as the mountains, built of fresh-milled pine from the creek. It had 4 rooms. It had a real shingled roof. It had glass windows, and it had a wide, long porch, built to last 100 years. Bo worked alongside his men. He did not just supervise. He hammered nails. He swung an axe. He lifted rafters until his shoulders screamed. He was shedding his old skin, the skin of the man who only wrote in ledgers. He was working with his hands, and he felt a satisfaction that no contract, no foreclosure, had ever given him. Kelly worked beside him. She was not a spectator. She cooked for the crew, her hands growing strong. She hammered. She painted. She was his partner, in every sense of the word, and the hardness in her eyes, the cold, brittle defense, it melted away. It was replaced by a light, a warmth, a deep, steady glow that he found himself turning to, like a plant to the sun. One evening, in late autumn, the house was finished. The crew had been sent back to the rocking sea. It was just them. The children were asleep inside, in real beds, in their own rooms. Bo and Kelly stood on the new porch, leaning against the rail. The air was cold and clean. "It is a palace," Kelly said, her voice a low, wondering whisper. I do not know how to thank you." "Do not," Bo said. He turned to face her in the moonlight. You do not owe me, Kelly. I owe you." "Owe me?" she asked, confused. "For what?" "For everything," he said. He took her hand. It was no longer the raw, cut, bleeding hand he had first seen. It was calloused and strong, and it fit in his. "I came here a rich man. I owned everything, and I had nothing. I was an empty place. You told me so yourself." "I was angry," she whispered. "You were right," he said. "I had a fortress, Kelly, but it was not keeping the world out. It was just keeping me in. You and your children. You tore it down. You filled that empty place." He lifted her hand to his lips, a gesture that was now familiar. "And right, I do not love you because you are weak. Kelly, I love you because you are the strongest person I have ever known. You are stronger than me." "No," she said, her other hand coming up to touch his face. We are just strong, together." He leaned down and kissed her. It was not the desperate kiss of the wagon, or the tender, fearful kiss of the road. It was a kiss of home. It was a kiss of peace and promise and a deep, settled, unshakable love. They were married a week later, on that same porch. The preacher from Laramie came, his eyes wide at the miracle that had occurred at Dry Creek. Jack Darrow was the best man. The 5 children were the only witnesses. Bo Callahan did not stop being a businessman. The Dry Creek Ranch, with its new house and its precious water rights, became the most prosperous part of his holdings. He did not just build a home, he built a future. But he was a changed man. He had learned that the greatest debts are not written in ink, and the greatest assets are not measured in acres. He had learned that true wealth was not in the cold, hard logic of a contract, but in the warm, messy, inefficient, and miraculous business of a family. He had come to collect a simple $800 debt, and in return, he had been given a life. The ledger was, at long last, truly balanced. Thank you for listening to this story. We would love to know where you are listening from, so please drop a comment below and share your thoughts. Be sure to subscribe to Wild West Tales and like this video. And if you want to support us, please hit that hype button so this story can be heard by more people.